Okay, now as you know, over the course of this year we've been doing lots and lots of mini tests just to try and make sure that your exam technique is as up to scratch as your geography is. Because we've been doing lots and lots of mini tests, sometimes it's quite difficult to be able to make sure that we can get feedback and proper feedback based on all of those sessions within the classroom, because we've still got lots and lots of geographical content to go through. So what I wanted to do was to create a short video for your second mini test that you took, which was on population resources, just to give you a brief overview and some feedback of some of the things that we've done. Some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this video clip are going to help you, and you're going to need some of the information for a homework task which I've set in order to make sure that we can start improving our exam technique. Now the first population mini, or the second population mini test that we've just done, was on population policies. So just to put that in the context of the big picture, there's a few different things that we looked at. We looked at China's one-child policy, obviously, as a way of controlling the birth rates. We split it into two sections. We looked at it pre sort of 1990, looking at the granny police, looking at the China's child video, and then brought it up to date with some of the changes in 1990 plus. So things like being able to have 2 children in rural areas in order to make sure that there's enough labour for farming. We also looked at some other population issues, such as ageing populations, and we looked at a couple of case studies as ways of coping with it, and we looked at kind of the differences between the technological fix and some of the things that they've been talking about in Japan, to kind of the pronatalism, encouraging people to have more children in France, and some of the ways in which that they started to encourage people to try and have more kids in order to increase the birth rate. We also looked at controlling population problems through migration, and that's where your transmigration in Indonesia case study is going to be vital. Now the test that you sat covered 2 areas really. It covered China's one-child policy in quite a lot of detail, and it also covered coping with the ageing populations and some of the things that are in Japan. So we're just going to run through some of the things that you did well, some of the things that you need to improve. Okay, the first one is a little bit of a bugbear really. Lots of you are writing this down in exam. You're writing the word kids. So in China they are trying to limit the amount of kids that people are having. Please don't write kids in an exam. The correct word is children. Okay, they're not baby goats, and you need to make sure that you're doing that, because as soon as you write down kids, the examiner is already going to build kind of a little bit of a picture of you in your mind, and it's amazing how much psychology comes into marking some of these different exams. So please, please, please don't write kids. Please write children when it comes to these exams. Okay, right, the first question, it asked you about the reasons for the one-child policy. Okay, now I've put a couple of different things that match up with some of your different responses, and you'll notice I've put L1 and I've put L2 next to some of these different responses. That's because some of the things you said were quite basic, they were quite simple. They weren't wrong, but they could only get you level 1 marks, so they could only get you a maximum of about 2 or 3 marks. And some of the things that you wrote were overpopulation to lower the birth rate. Okay, now you're not wrong, they did introduce the one-child policy to lower the birth rate and because of overpopulation, but what you need to make sure is that you're going into much more detail. So instead of just saying lower the birth rate, you could have said for level 2 to lower the birth rate as population growth means that there will be too many people and it will outstrip food supply, or in other words, there'll be too many people and not enough food to go around. Or talking about maybe perhaps lowering birth rates because of the effects of overpopulation, and trying to achieve a balance between population and resources. Okay, and I said give e.g., which means give examples. Whenever you say resources, what resources are you talking about? Are you talking about food? Are you talking about water? Are you talking about oil? All sorts of different things can come under resource, so you've got to be specific. Okay, now that comes down to your exam skills. You know the answer. Okay, whenever I ask you in class, so what, you can always think about those knock-on effects. So instead of just writing lower the birth rate, ask yourself after that question, so what, is there anything else that I can add? In other words, why are they trying to lower the birth rate? Okay, so that's kind of the first thing really that you needed to consider when talking about the reasons for the one-child policy. Use key words, okay? Say words like birth rate, death rate, infant mortality rate, because you know them, okay? Not amount of kids being born, not increase the amount of kids being born. They're going to try and increase the birth rate. Although there's no difference in what you're trying to say, and geographically you're still right, in an exam you will not get the marks unless you are using the proper geography words and the proper key terms. So get into the habit of using them as much as you possibly can today. Okay, One of the questions asked you about the changes to the one-child policy. Now, it gave you 4 options. So it said more than 1 child for rural areas. It gave you talk about ethnic minorities now being allowed to have more than 1 child. And it also talked about parents who have got no brothers and sisters. So in other words, parents that are only children, they can have more than 1 child, or they can stretch to have 2 children. Now, some of these are a little bit easier to explain than others. Now, you all know some of the different changes, or you should know for the exam. But what you need to be able to do is to take them that step further forward. Now, I've put a star next to more than 1 child in rural areas because I think this is one that we focus on the most, and I think this is the easiest one to try and explain. So I've put on there a little star which says if there are more than 1 child in rural areas, that means that Chinese farmers will be able to have more people to farm their land, which means that they can produce more agricultural output. In other words, they can make more things, and they can sell more things, and they can start to make more money, and they can make sure that there's lots and lots of people within China that can be fed because there's more people working within agriculture and working within farming. If you did that, you got top marks. It was much, much easier. The reasons for changes towards brothers and sisters, well, that's harder to explain, so is the ethnic minority ones. So try and use your common sense, try and be sensible about some of the things that you're doing, and try and focus along some of those different routes and some of those different ideas. Okay, now in terms of the skills, actually you did really, really well. You had a graph that you had to do, you took your time, you read the graph, you took care, and you used your common sense. That's good, that's why I put a big tick next to it. So keep doing that. Apply your common sense, use your skills, read the graphs, write down the numbers, okay, nice and easy. Okay, now for the 6 mark questions, this is where we need to do lots and lots of work, on a foundation paper at least, okay? You need to make sure that you box the command words. If it says describe, underline describe. If it says explain, underline explain, so that you know exactly what that question is asking for. If it's a 6 mark question, the chances are you will not be able to get many marks unless you include a case study. Remember, geography is the study of the world, and it would be ridiculously stupid if we didn't include any examples and any case studies within those answers. And I've put give specific information. Show the examiner that you know what the case study is all about. If you can remember the percentages of Chinese people that live in rural areas, write it down. If you can remember some key facts and figures on an ageing population, like the percentage of people that are old dependents, write it down, because it's those key facts and figures and specific case study information that shows the examiner that you really know it. And that's going to allow you to access the level 2 and possibly even level 3 marks, okay? Now, whenever an examiner marks your exam, they always use a very similar looking mark scheme. Level 1 looks at basic things. So you had a question about the features of the 1 child policy. If you wrote down the 1 child policy means that you have 1 child, talks about granny police, fines for people, but you put it in a really, really simple way. It doesn't matter what you write down, you cannot get any more than 4 marks or 3 or 4 marks. In order to get the level 2 answers, you need to use linked statements, okay? And that's where so what comes into effect. So you need to use phrases like this means that, therefore, because of this. So for example, if you said there have been changes to the policy, there are more people that are able to have 2 children in rural areas, this is because they need more people in order to be able to farm the land to provide food security, okay, or to provide more food for people. That's what you need to do. And you need to be specific. You need to get that level 3 information in. Now, one of the questions that you had was not about China, it was about an ageing population. And it said this: many countries now have an ageing population. Describe how a country may try to encourage an increase in the birth rate. Now, that question is asking you for a case study, and it's asking you for France. Now, I've given you a sheet of paper for homework which has got that question on it, and it's also got some criteria that we need to consider when answering some of these questions. Now, I want you for homework to have a go at answering this question again, and I really want you to think about what this question is asking you to do. Now, I said that you need to box the command words, apply case studies, and give specific information. Well, our command words in that question are many countries, because that tells us that we need to include a case study, describe, okay, and encourage an increase in the birth rate. Now, I would underline encourage, because if we underline encourage, we know that it's about something that's pro-natalist like France, rather than something which is about controlling birth rates, such as China. Okay, so you need to make sure that you're aware of that. Apply a case study. Well, we should be able to work out that we're talking about France, and we need to give specific information. So that could be the amount of money that people are given in order to try and get 3-bedroom houses, or it could be well, it could be anything from the amount of time off that women are given extra in maternity leave to try and encourage people to have more children. Okay, that's what you need to do. So, bearing in mind what I've written on your exam papers and bearing in mind the things that we've talked about in this video and in class, what I want you to do is I want you to look at your answer and I want you to try and complete that answer again, because when we come into the next lesson, we're going to need to make sure that we've got that answer in front of us, ready to do some peer assessment. Okay, thank you very much. If you've got any questions, then obviously all you need to do is come and find me. My door is open all the time, and ask.